Hello, Uganda. Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hot Seat on 933 KFM. I welcome you, our listeners, across this beautiful land, the Pearl of Africa. My name is Patrick Kamara. Tonight, we take a look at Uganda's economy from the perspective of the public debt. Because just this week, we have seen Parliament sitting to pass the borrowing of over 8 trillion Uganda shillings that can help in building infrastructure, especially roads in the areas of Ntoroko and areas of Bunyoro and other parts of Uganda. And so that 8 trillion means that Uganda's public debt is increasing to almost 120 trillion Uganda shillings. Ultimately, will this country be able to turn around this debt? Will be able to pay without causing further pain to the rest of Ugandans? Let me introduce my guest who is joining me first online. Is Mr. Simon Kaheru from the East African Business Council Uganda chapter. Thank you so much for joining us, Simon. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Patrick, and all the listeners out there. Very good to be here.
I know I've heard you say at one point, it's not bad for a country to borrow. Many countries indeed have borrowed. But when we borrow at this rate, and how we use this money in Uganda, especially when money sometimes hits the account and then stays there and is not being utilized, or when it is utilized but then it's not utilized efficiently, then the borrowing is not of good use. Simon, what's your take?
Then the borrowing is counterproductive.
Yes.
But if the reverse happens, as you stated, then it is meaningful, right? Yes. Definitely.
Okay, make a case in your view.
So the case is for the money that we borrow as a country to be put to sensible use productively, and to be money that we can afford to pay back using our current economy as it stands, and the economy that will be, or the economic activity that will result from that borrowing. Those two. And whatever we do, we must never stop reminding our government, our bureaucrats, about this cardinal rule of taking loans. You take a loan knowing full well that you're going to put it to the purpose that will pay it back at the right rate of return. But when it's government, a loan that's going to benefit the citizens, grow the economy. Yeah, yesterday's happenings in Parliament, the loan that was applied for, raised a couple of concerns in some corners because of the amounts involved, then the season that we're in, because everyone feels, but now we are undergoing campaigns and elections. Why are we borrowing money now? Are we going to use this money for political election activity? No. If that happens, as some people are suspecting, then of course we're doing something very stupid. But I think what we should have North Uganda look at today is the statement that the PSST, Ramadan Gobi, issued after the meetings at the World Bank, where he explained that the World Bank and the IMF, those institutions, are looking at providing financing that's going to trigger private sector involvement in the economy, or to spur more private sector involvement in the economy. For me, that was the most exciting part of that message that he sent out. This is not money that's just being put to developing infrastructure. It's not just going into social care, the social amenities and things like that. No, it is for private sector activity to be unlocked further. And that focus, that's where we need to be very excited.
But Simon, when you go back to the intentions for which government borrows, I mean, they're always very good. And there's no one who's going to have bad intentions to get money. But the problem is that our record is not good. And we seem never to learn to make that record straight, to make sure things run smoothly. You'll almost see money borrowed after money. In most cases, if it is a public good, there will be shorter work, or there will be delays, or sometimes for the road construction, there will be somebody will be not giving a right of way because it's not been compensated. Remember, the money is picking interest even when it's not being utilized. That is the Ugandan situation.
And it is for that very reason that we need to look up and show concern and monitor where this money is going how it's being utilized, and are we paying it back? But before we do that, we need to understand what's the money being borrowed for. In the past, you never ever had the World Bank IMF talking about the private sector or the government for that matter when they are borrowing money. It was always about government needs to provide roads. Then a road is completed, and you and I have been here for more than 40 years of this NRM. For the 40 years this NRM government has been in power. You remember when roads were tarmacked in the beginning, people would say, oh, can you imagine they've tarmacked the road and people are using it to dry cassava or to dry rice or coffee. That's what used to happen in the past, because infrastructure was not being directly linked to private sector growth, private sector activity. Today, with these borrowings that are being talked about, I can't remember exactly how many loans they are, but the 2 billion of the H was spoken about, very clearly ring fence so that private sector activity is unlocked. Now, yesterday, again, 2 days ago, we had another release about investors who have been invited into Uganda, a different group of investors who have been invited to take advantage of these new opportunities we have, again, where? Food, textiles, and of course oil and gas. People being invited from out there. We who are here, what are we doing and what are we waiting for?
But let us look at the kind of money we have borrowed so far. In fact, I think the NRM government has borrowed a lot of money than all other regimes combined. Anyway, we can also understand that they've been here quite for some time.
They've been here longer than us.
Yes, but you see, almost 120 trillion.
Yes.
And there's little to show. There isn't much to show to really correspond with the kind of money we've been able to borrow. The other day, somebody was making calculation that for every child that is born today in Uganda, you're more or less born with a debt of 1.7 million Uganda shillings. We may not feel it, but there's going to be a time when things are going to be really tough.
I totally disagree with that analysis. Well, first and foremost, we can't just say there's nothing to show, okay? And the reason President Museveni is always talking about in 1986 is what happened, is you must understand where we started from. We didn't start from the surface here. No, we started from a very deep hole. And we started from a very deep hole that required us to do certain things as a country. But those initial borrowings dealt with that. 2 weeks ago, I think it was 2 weeks ago, when the First Lady spoke about a foundation. That's what we've been building for quite a long time now. And you know that when you're building a foundation for a massive building, it's going to be much deeper in the ground. However, even with that foundation, there are many things that have changed. And that's why Uganda has been consistently. In fact, this is not the first time. I believe it was 8 or 10 years ago when Uganda and India were listed as the two countries that will be the fastest growing economies by 2035 or something. I can't remember the exact numbers. We're in a very good space. But we have potential that we are not making use of. And this is our biggest problem. There's a lot here in this country, and I'm not going to talk about East Africa for now, but a lot here in this country that we are simply not using, including the ability of our land and how we can feed this continent. We keep talking about the potential of that. We're not doing it. We're still sleeping. We keep talking about how we have so much industrial activity that can be unlocked if we produce more. We're still not doing that yet. No. In the few pockets that are doing it, you can see successes.
You know, Simon, you understand the tourism sector. I know that. And there was a classic example of borrowing, I think, from the World Bank to build a school of hospitality somewhere in Jinja. And there was that classic case where the money stayed on account for almost 7-8 years and the school was not being built. And yet, every year, you know, money we have to pay interest on that money. And this was a very painful, though eventually somehow the school is being built or almost near completion, but for almost 8-7 years, the money is just there.
Patrick, do you remember last year's report of a whole range of projects that had been delayed or simply not completed, and where money even had to be returned in some cases after interest had been paid? That speaks to a very poor execution. It does not speak to whether borrowing is good or bad. Borrowing is good if you execute what you borrowed for. Even in our private businesses, we've all seen how many people borrow money from the bank. You remember from the days of NPAT, used to be the Uganda Commercial Bank, when you had that non-performing assets recovery trust.
Yes. That
was because businessmen in Uganda had been borrowing for years and not bothering to pay back their loans. I have a couple of mortgages or loans, I can call them. One of my biggest issues every month. Remember, you must pay that deposit on top of saving before you consume. This is so that I don't get into a hole. As a country, we definitely need to understand that. Definitely. And if we don't get it, then we are going to get into the trouble that you spoke about earlier. But we have no reason to get there because most of our people running this economy are educated, and I'm using quotation marks, are educated to a level that they can go and negotiate with the World Bank and IMF to this point where the jubilation letter from the PSST, and I believe this is the first time we've had a PSST again sending out such a release, can be shared so widely around the country and cause all this excitement. Now, I was telling me that yesterday, the second issue of concern was how these loan proposals were put on the table in Parliament, and within a matter of hours, everything had been passed. We need to raise questions about that. We need to raise questions about the quality of our members of Parliament, especially in the coming House. We now have an opportunity to change those who are not serious, so that we don't have a situation where the wrong loans are being taken, where information is not being presented for the right analysis.
And you know, it is a season, it is even a season, Simon, where it is hard to get members of Parliament in Parliament to debate. You're going to have a few people there, and some people even, their minds now are scattered in the villages trying to get nomination is just beginning tomorrow and the other day. So
they're counting T-shirts. Look, one member of Parliament, we've been ridiculing him on Twitter today. One member of Parliament, instead of being in Parliament making his arguments, was on Twitter saying, "You people, see, they're doing this." We asked him, what nonsense, human? You were supposed to be the one in Parliament. You should have first of all received these documents 2 weeks ago, done your analysis and research. You should be there discussing and representing the people, not on social media, making all sorts of irrelevant noise. But those are the people we need to kick out of the House and bring in serious people. It's a pity you're not standing, you Patrick Kamara.
But Simon, how about, I don't know, you know, whether some of these discussions are supposed to be at the committee level, and then the committee, then the people, Ugandans with the expertise, economists and financial analysts, just to come in and, you know, add more value to some of this discussion. Because if it doesn't happen that way, yes, they are paid and their job is to legislate and make laws and do all that, but they need that support
and oversight as well.
Yes.
And oversight.
Yeah, but yeah. If the people are not involved, you know, because I know at committee level where most of the action is done, you know, members of the public are supposed to join and give in their views. And in a situation like this, and it doesn't happen, and it is brought in and it's passed very fast, before you know it, we have hit a dead end.
No, Patrick. There are parliamentary rules of procedure. There are different things that go to different committees, you know, for different reasons. We should, and that's what I'm talking about, the people we elect into Parliament. Let's make sure that we elect people who understand what their work is. Their work is not to be supervising bridges made out of eucalyptus poles in the village. Their work is to be in that house with their researchers in Parliament, their economists at Parliament. These people should be doing this research, analysis and study, and even consultation where need be, well in advance. And then when they're having the discussion on the floor of the House, we also need to understand that we're electing the executive into power. The president and his team, when you look at their manifesto, they are telling you what they're going to do. We don't go and sit in the ministries with them every single day. We entrust them with the responsibility of running the country. Then we entrust the parliamentarians, legislators, with, you know, oversight, making sure that while the executive is running the country, they are doing it with our interest at heart every single step of the way.
So now, when you look
that's their job.
When you look at the budget, for example, the one we're running on, I think about 70 trillion or thereabout. But Simon, the biggest chunk, of course, of that money is going to service the debt. And the biggest chunk is more into consumption. And then there's very little money that can actually be deployed to spark growth. And that is the kind of cycle you're in and year out.
And but then, Patrick, again, you do the analysis and we won't say there's very little money. You will do the percentages. But reading what Ramadan sent out yesterday on the different conversations, that's another exciting part where there's an acknowledgement that budgeting needs to be improved. In fact, in that statement of his, he uses the phrase budget games. He calls it budget games and supplementary budgets. Okay? Which we know is we can call it a trick, you know, quotation marks. We pass a budget as a country every year. Within a few months, oh, we didn't plan for this, we didn't plan for that. We now need to create a supplementary budget, which negates the entire budgeting process.
But even the supplementary is supposed to stay within. Supplementary is supposed to stay within a certain percentage limit of the bigger budget.
Yeah, it should not exist. You should cut your cloth. Okay, according to you cut your suit according to the size of the amount of cloth you have. Those are things that need to change. If people know that they always can go for a supplementary budget, they won't bother sticking to the plan that was made in the beginning. The plan will be to go outside of the plan. you get it? Now, one of the conditions, I haven't read all the conditions in that extended credit facility, but the IMF, World Bank, in all the different countries in Africa, by the way, because of geopolitics and a lot of stuff that constrained how much money they have to distribute, they're asking all these African countries to mobilize more money from within their countries to increase the tax base, but to increase production in order to do so. So that it's not the big companies that are going to be taxed more, but there needs to be more production so that there's more tax revenue, which tax revenue the government should use properly without turning immediately for external financing.
And for Uganda's increasing of tax revenue collection becomes hard because I have seen them deepening, taxing the very same entities as opposed to broadening it to bring other people into the tax bracket. That is a phenomenal challenge here.
Yes, and so you see, this is why, for instance, manufacturing and industrialization has now been given, not now, for the last 15 years, because it's 3 election cycles ago, has been given much more importance, because we all know that the economy has been for a long time import-based. The idea was substitute those imports, because you're losing money if you don't use what you have here, increase exports, decrease those imports so that you can manufacture more here in the country, export more, create wealth within the country, and that enables the government to tax these people because they are more wealthy.
Okay.
The joke the president said the other day about people who drink alcohol, it's a joke, but in economic terms it makes sense. Those people actually providing, the country is relying on them because they must consume their alcohol. But are we importing it or making it here within Uganda?
All right.
We need to ask ourselves.
Simon Kaheru from the East Africa Business Council, Uganda chapter, I want to thank you so much for always adding value to this platform. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we shall be joined by Dr. Aisha Kasolo from Private Sector Foundation Uganda, who's also managing the GROW project. We'll be right back.
The hottest.
Welcome back to 933 KFM, and this is the Hot Seat. My name is Patrick Kamara, and we continue the discussion focusing on Uganda's economy from the perspective of the public debt, because we know that just this week alone, the public debt has increased by another 8 trillion after Parliament passing a total of around 8 trillion to borrow. And we've just heard from Mr. Simon Kaheru from the East African Business Council. My next guest is a Ugandan entrepreneur, is a motivational speaker, is a business growth coach, an advocate for women's economic empowerment. She's also the national coordinator for the GROW project, the World Bank sponsored GROW project, which focuses on providing women with access to business training, financing, and mentorship. Dr. Aisha Kasolo, good evening.
And I'm a member of the board of the Presidential CEO Forum.
Yes, I could not. If I decided to read all the accolades, Doctor, I had to cut them short. Pardon me, please.
I have to introduce myself as if I'm in Nigeria. You know, in Nigeria, you have to say everything.
I know, but you have quite a number of titles, and all of them you've worked for them. But you know, this borrowing, Dr. Aisha Kasolo, as an entrepreneur. And a business growth coach, really. Sometimes, doesn't it really concern you that maybe we are going too far?
Patrick, I think the issue is not about borrowing, because even USA is in debt. You tell me, USA is in debt. The point is about when you borrow the money, what is it for? Are you ready for it? Is it coming at the right time and the right purpose? And when you have it, what processes are you using? And I think for me that is where the problem is. Money we are getting for loans is not bad money. First of all, if we are getting money from the World Bank, it's the lowest that we can ever get on the money.
You know, some of this money, by the way, is internal borrowing from the banks in here, Stanbic Bank, Standard Chartered, and things like that.
Yes. And then if you're getting it from others, some of the lines of credit are slightly expensive. But for me, the point is for this country, when we are borrowing money, where are we putting it? And now the Ministry of Finance has been clear, money is going to the ATMs. If we can actually be able to develop our mineral sector, we have gold right now. They are saying we have the largest gold deposit in Africa. I hope it is true. We have the oil. We have, they are saying we have platinum. I don't know where platinum is. We have coal here. We have these people that do aluminium. You get it? Just imagine if we are able to use the money to develop our mineral sector. Because once we develop the mineral sector, the income of the country is going to increase.
But Dr. Kasolo, what has been the Ugandan experience in using borrowed money? What is the experience? What is our record?
What I have to tell you is that most of the roads we see, apart from recently, the last 4 years, most of the roads we see and the cities developed are developed because of borrowed money. The markets are done based on borrowed money. You'll even see the signposts in those places. It's either World Bank, UDB, FDB, it could be European Investment Bank, but it is using borrowed money. Why? Because the economy has been extremely very constrained. There has not been economic activities, and that is why now it is much more better to borrow into areas that can kick off job creation. All the energy you see, electricity you see across the country has been done largely because of borrowed money. So with borrowed money, we've been able to do so much. My biggest problem is one, we borrow money when we are not prepared. Sometimes these loans are approved by the World Bank, by African Development Bank, by Japan, whatever it is. When we are not ready, we take about 2 years. And sometimes our own internal processes, I can tell you, you can go through very lengthy processes, procedures to spend the money. Most of the delays in disbursement of money are because of these lengthy processes.
So why is it that sometimes these MDAs and the ministries, the departments and agencies of government are not reading on the same hymn, especially borrowing from the money, so that they are ready that when the money comes, actually the money is put to use? Dr. Kasolo, sometimes money can stay on account, yet is attracting interest and it's not being used.
Yeah, you see what happens. What happens is that these donors, also development partners, they have their own procurement procedures, environmental procedures. Then also government has its own procurement procedures that you cannot make a decision instantly. Just imagine if you're going to do a bridge or a railway and you say, I have seen this in Turkey. I want to go and shop this company that I've seen in Turkey to do the work. If it is your own money, your own decision, if you're a private sector player, you make your decision instantly. If it is a development partner, it is government, you have to go through this. And I think for me, if the president has to protect the gains, these remaining ones, he needs to review the processes, are implemented. And I know the problem is you go through 2 years, 1 year, you're following up a procurement on something, on a procedure which can actually be cut, which can be shortened, but it cannot. Because the World Bank or African Development Bank or European Investment Bank, whatever, is saying, no, you have to go through all this. Sometimes they can even declare something ineligible because of the mere process. You have done everything okay, but because you are supposed to use a category of consulting, you use the granting category, however good the thing is, it is the wrong thing. So I think the bureaucracy and even the capacity of the staff has to implement, but also the capacity of the staff that give us the money. You sometimes have a feeling that, because these people are international, some of them also don't know what they are doing. They take a lot of time to consult, and by the time they make a decision, it is too long. So for me, His Excellency the President, he needs to look at this. He needs to make a drastic change in the way things are done.
So you have no feeling at all?
If you have to do, a moment. If you have to do a procurement of $200 million, 200 million, it has to go to Solicitor General. All right? And they have now slightly improved, but it has been taking a lot of time. And for me, one of the things that other governments are doing, they have a department in charge of loan projects, things where money is borrowed. That it is known, once something comes, it is cleared at once. We lose a lot of time to clear all these things. And I think it is high time that we review our own processes. Sometimes it takes a lot of time in Parliament. The process to have the loan approved to Parliament is a longer process. It goes to Cabinet, it goes to NPA, it goes to NRM, it goes to what, it goes to what. We need to ask ourselves, do we really need this? Do we really need all this? Do we need all these lengthy processes? Can't we put a department that is looking at this, that is fully fledged, that the moment a loan comes, if it is in finance, it is fully fledged. It has a staff of the Solicitor General, it has a staff of Ministry of Land, it has a staff doing this and that, and we are able to do everything at once. For me, I see that is the problem, and if it is not sorted, we are going to continue crying and complaining and saying money, we are borrowing money, it is not being used, it is not being utilized, and that becomes a very big problem.
Okay, Dr. Kasolo, another colleague here sent a message. Actually, he's supposed to be on this panel, but he's somewhere in the United Kingdom in London. Amos Wekesa says he thinks that the government is digging deep into a hole of debt, and he says an economy is a composition of businesses, but it looks like the people running the affairs now of our country have no idea about businesses. What do you make of that?
No, for me, I think that if we are borrowing to create more jobs, it is not a problem. If we are borrowing, for example, I want to give an example. If we are saying we want to transform the tourism sector, how do we do that? How do we get more tourists to come? Let's refurbish the park. Let's market Uganda. Let us make sure we push buses. Let's improve this and that. Then you're supporting the sector. If you're saying, if we have to support production, people need affordable finance. If we can actually borrow money, cheap money, to make sure there is affordable money on the market, what's wrong with that? Then businesses are able to acquire money. I think for me, where there is a problem is borrowing money to non-essential things. And I think one of the key things that Ramazan has been able to look at, because he was a member of our party, is to make sure that we scrutinize the loans, to make sure that we focus on productive loans. We should not just borrow money for the sake of for social welfare, sensitizing people to love each other. We can't borrow money for that.
Okay, I know you threw in a joke there, right? I want to thank you, Dr. Aisha Kasolo. I want to thank you so much for your effort, for your submission.
Yes.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we shall be joined by Dr. Fred Muhumuza, Director Economic Forum at Makerere University Business School, and later we shall also be joined by another economist, Mr. Jarvis Atwine. We'll be right back.
Day 7 to 8 p.m.
Welcome back to 933 KFM, and this is the Hot Seat. My name is Patrick Amara, and tonight we are looking at the public debt because the government is continuing to borrow. Just this week, the debt has increased by another 8 trillion, and it's going to almost 112 trillion shillings that the government has borrowed. Where is that money going to be gotten from for us to be able to pay back? We have heard from Mr. Simon Kaheru from the East African Business Council. We have heard from Dr. Aisha Kasolo from the National Coordinator of the Growth Project, and now we are joined online by the Director Economic Forum at Makerere University Business School, MUBS, Dr. Fred Muhumuza. Dr. Muhumuza, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear, and want to thank you for finding some time to be able to add value to this platform. As an economist and a lecturer at the university, this business of borrowing, hasn't it reached a level where you as an economist, you think we are maybe getting into a debt trap?
Well, I think we have been in a trap for some time, going by the realities, because if you look at the budgets that we have approved and passed for the last 5 years, the result is what we call debt restructuring. Now, in accounting terms and economic terms, the moment you get into restructuring your debt, it means you are getting to the debt stress zone. You should be thinking twice before you get any new borrowing. But now in the case of Uganda, we are in a situation where not everything can be done from our revenue that we pick from URA and other sources, non-tax revenue. We have to keep borrowing, including borrowing to pay back part of the debt that we borrowed. That, technically speaking, would be a debt trap. But what do we do now? Because there are things we must continue doing, and we don't have the money. Now, the grand thing would be, how did I get here? How do I get out of here? That discussion is sitting outside the borrowing. You have to get into the drivers of the government budget and restructure. It was partly the cause for the structuring of government, but it's a process that could not continue, unfortunately. Some of us still think we need to restructure government with a view of reducing its size, making it more efficient, and then we can begin to have less demands for money and begin the journey of managing that debt and restructuring and reducing it.
I've heard some people say that, look, we are not really in distress, and they give examples of both the countries in the region that have bigger debts, or even developed countries that have colossal sums of money in terms of debt, maybe 60-70% of their budget, and they seem not to be panicking. What explains that?
You see, the problem with the debt is not the stock, it is the structure. Now, you people, and I've had those arguments, people saying Japan's debt is 234%. But Japan is borrowing at 0.5%. For almost 15-20 years, Japan was borrowing at negative rate. Now, if Japan is borrowing for 30 years at 0.5%, you don't compare that with Uganda, whose borrowing of 2 years is 16%. That's one problem. Secondly, Japan borrows from its citizens. Japan lends money to America. Japan is the biggest creditor to America, over $1 trillion. And America will be paying them 3%. So if I borrow at 0.5%, lend at 3%, there is no problem. I'm making money out of borrowing. So you don't want to begin comparing by debt sizes. The problem with debt, one, is the structure. Two, is the liquidity constraint it puts on you. Now, as the president has mentioned many times, you don't have money to do roads because the money has gone into debt payment. That already is something the Japanese don't have, the British don't have, the Germans don't have. So you don't want to go by the stock. Look at what is the implication of debt on my liquidity and ability to continuously deliver my services. So until we get to that level, we will begin to say, what are we going for? What did the past debt do? How do we go forward?
I know we could be comparing dwarfs, but Ugandan economists and managers of the economy say, look in the region, Uganda is doing much better.
We're doing much better in which sense? Because all of you are restructuring your debt. All of you are not raising enough, but even logically, even if you don't look at others, we began borrowing 20, 30, 40 years ago. I remember we had the debt forgiveness in 1998, in 2000 and 2004. Our debt went down to below $1 billion, the foreign debt. Now, we said we are going to borrow, invest, grow the economy, and the growing economy will pay back the debt. Now, you have reached a situation where you begin to ask, what did that borrowing do? Because now the economy has not grown to allow me to pay back the debt. Now, nobody should be convincing us that the current borrowing we are doing is going to do what the old borrowing did not do.
But that
is really the problem.
Let me ask, is there somebody or an entity that gets some kind of a percentage or a commission on any loan that we get from some of these multinationals? And so we may think there is also some hidden agenda in rushing to get the money borrowed.
There is that conversation out there. Of course, for most of the loans, there is always somebody who bridges and initiates the loan. So sometimes there is a loan management fee, especially when you get into commercial loans, the ones we are taking from commercial banks. There is always an arrangement fee, because you may come and say, I want this much from Bank X. But Bank X would say, I cannot lend you all that money, but I will coalesce with others. So that bank is certainly going to charge you some commission. But also the other part that we have seen, you might be driven by people who build, let's say, for example, transmission lines. For them, they're in the business of building transmission lines. So when you don't have money, they'll say, fine, we can guide you where you can borrow, and then give us the money and we'll build the transmission line. Now, you begin to wonder, is this line for me or for them? We have seen those. I know for a fact that China Exim Bank will say, we exported a road to you. So the Exim Bank of China, Import Exim Bank of China, will lend you money, do a project here, which you would not have done otherwise. Now, you need to be back thinking, is this project going to serve me? and we've had conversations on very many projects that we think it might help Uganda, but the help is not obvious. Or the help requires additional things that you need to do before you can benefit from them. It is driven by the creditors because their business is to lend. And you need to be thinking, well, I'm borrowing for which project? Will they pay back the debt?
So now,
on the surface, they might, but they might not do it in reality.
So, Dr. Muhumuza, I know at one point you have worked with the government. You have been an advisor, I think, in Ministry of Finance. And at the ministry there, we have men and women who are senior economists. Some of them have even been lecturers at top universities, teaching economics. And when you stand on that side, you're like, no, some of the decisions we're taking are not right. So are some of these colleagues of yours not getting it, or now they're not bothered at all?
You know, the problem is looking at government as an individual, and so there is this person who is in the Ministry of Finance or is sitting at the central bank. But government decision making can come from a variety of things. So some people will sit and say, we want to do this, we want to generate additional electricity. So, and people have worked out their numbers to say Uganda has a low GDP per capita utilization. And you question, because they will say now we need to build another dam, we need to build another dam. Uganda's consumption is too low compared to the global. And I'm like, guys, wait a minute. The Uganda's need for power does not compare with Sweden, which for half of the year is frozen 20 degrees below. So those ones will need a lot of power at that point. But in Uganda, we have the sun. But people will be using global numbers. Now, that decision may come to finance, cabinet decided. We must borrow. Now, you don't want to blame somebody in finance because it's a cabinet decision. But sometimes we say you can still engage, come up with other facts. Now, people will say, you must do this road, they will promote tourism. We must do this road, they will promote agriculture. But I'm not saying that happened. So within government, there are people you can pin down and say, well, at least you particular group of people, you had the ability to present the evidence, you did not. But at times, the thing is overtaken by events. You go and borrow $200 million to upgrade the Entebbe airport because you're expecting tourists are going to increase the numbers, this is coming, and quite a lot of things do happen in government that at times, as you said, I've worked there and I know what happens in government decision making. You find it difficult to pin down an individual and say, this is the person who possibly caused this, because there will be more than one person.
I want to thank you so much, Dr. Fred Muhumuza, Director, Economic Forum at Makerere University Business School. Thank you, sir.
A pleasure. Thank you, too, Patrick.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we shall be joined by another economist, Mr. Jarvis. Welcome back to 933 KFM, and this is the Hot Seat. My name is Patrick Amara, and tonight we're trying to shed a light into the public debt because it has been growing. Just this week, it has increased by another 8 trillion because Parliament passed a number of loans that are going to be procured, and that was going to raise Uganda's public debt to over 120 trillion shillings, and it's causing concern to some, but some people are saying it's okay because all other countries borrow. We've heard from Simon Kaheru from the East Africa Business Council Uganda chapter. We've heard from the national coordinator of the Grow Project, Dr. Aisha Kasolo. And I've also heard from another economist, Dr. Fred Muhumuza, who director of Makerere University Business, Economic Forum of Makerere University Business School. We are now joined by the director, PECT Collection Services, another economist, Mr. Jarvis Atwine. Jarvis, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Patrick Kamaran. Thank you for the program.
Thank you for giving us a moment so that we can also hear from your perspective. You know, if Uganda is not being run like yes. Uganda Incorporated, like a business, it doesn't does it make sense to borrow when we are not running this country as a business?
I think, Patrick, one is to say you need to accept who you are, and you are Uganda, and that's who you are. When you draw your budget, you find out that actually 50% of your budget is going to be catered by borrowing. And that's the way how the African countries, most of them have gone to survive. But what should be a worry is to say, I'm liking the panic in which the way actually they have borrowed the money. You are talking about the 8 trillion that is being borrowed, that was passed actually by Parliament to be part of the debt that we have. as these politicians are moving up country, they are calling on to say this road was pending. I'm happy that the road Kampala Poto is going to be worked on. You remember 2 months ago they had put holes on some of the projects, and that road was inclusive. So if you have tourists that you're going to push from Kampala or from Entebbe, and you're going to take them to Poto, and the road is not worked on, how are you going to grow your tourism sector? Me, I believe that if the borrowing like of this nature is the trend that Uganda has been operating on, would be at the right trajectory. I believe also, as you had stated, Uganda actually ranks second in East Africa in better performance of GDP to debt to public debt ratio, running at around 61%. I'm happy to hear that we are performing better, and the most important thing is that we are looking at infrastructure development. For me, that gives Uganda a tick.
But Jarvis, before we get that tick, I want you to look at our record. What is our record in using borrowed money for public projects?
I would not wish to dwell in too much of politics. I don't want to be a politician at this moment. But I understand if you asked President Museveni, he would be telling you that I used to borrow money to go and buy guns to fight Konyi for over 20 years. And that means I was not constructing roads. I was not constructing hospitals. I had many government buildings dilapidated, and I was renting all over. So now that I finished with Konyi, now I'm concentrating on infrastructure development. I'm building dams. Uganda is not facing load shedding. To me, those are lines that someone can urge you out to say, I'm borrowing for the right purpose, Kamara. I'm not borrowing for the sake of borrowing. I'm borrowing because the road, I'm happy that the road that is taking you home, Patrick, is actually being put into consideration. Because every time you come from that road, you are buying shock absorbers. So for me, that is a joy to say, are we borrowing for the right cause?
Yeah, but look, 112 trillion Uganda shillings already in terms of debt. And you add on, look, at every budget, for example, the biggest percentage of the money for every budget is going into debt servicing. Not even payment, but debt servicing, which is an entirely different thing. But also another money is going into consumption. There's very little money that is going to spur growth because you're putting little. So how will the economy grow if we are only repaying debt and into consumption?
I'm sorry, I'm going to go into a class, and I'm going to tell you, Patrick, for you to own a car and you make the life of your family comfortable, looking at a standard of earning 500,000 only, you need to go and take a loan so that your family can be comfortable as you paying for the bus slowly. And for me, I would look at, for example, Rwanda's public debt is actually more than Uganda, almost like halfway. And we are asking ourselves that are Rwandans worried about their debt? But when you go to Rwanda right now, how many tourists have been attracted to go and visit Rwanda, the highly developing country in East Africa, because they've survived on debt to put up the infrastructure they have put up.
I also know as a fact, Jarvis, that if you go on the Rwanda-Ugandan border, you're most likely to see traffic is more or less like one way. Local Rwandese coming to Uganda to look for opportunities in Ugandan villages, not even in Kampala. And if Rwanda was the shining, the shining castle on the hill, why is it that the traffic is more on one side?
The challenge we have is that when we are, as economists, we will talk about the good researchers, the IMF report, the World Bank report on what it gives us, and that is the rating. That's why when you talk about development, people would look at the per capita ratio as per the research that has been done by World Bank and IMF and those recognized bodies. So for us, those are the statistics we look at. We don't look at what is the state of economic affairs in people's homes and household incomes. We are only looking at the infrastructure that has been put up. But Mr. Simon stated it correctly to say that we like the model of saying that having a road whereby people are going to do maize harvesting and they dry it there, let the road that's going to be constructed be of value. We are talking of East African gauge railway, which has been a cry for every Ugandan, because it has been like a song. What will it impact on our economy if it is constructed, much as it is on debt? The investors that will come in to support us using the same railway, we can help us get some money to recoup and pay on the debt. It is a cycle that if debt is not bad, the challenge we've had is that it is not managed well. There is a lot of intricate issues that come in with corruption, and you've talked about it, compensation if it is a road and it's tax on and the interest rate goes high. But I'm also happy with the internal borrowing as well. When I look at the statistics, Uganda has increased more of internal borrowing than external borrowing.
But I wonder, as an economist, why you'll be happy with internal borrowing, because now government will be competing with you and I and every other Ugandan and crowding out Ugandans to be able to go to these very banks and borrow.
Patrick, the things that Ugandans should be borrowing for are services that the government should be offering. That's something that we should also look at. If a Ugandan is able, I'm just giving it on a layman's language, if government is able to pick money internally, that person who is earning interest is ready to reinvest it into the country than giving it out to other countries where you would be borrowing. And it is developing Chinese. For me, I would feel to say the internal investor who is actually supporting the government to get this money would be at an advantage.
But you know, if you went to get a long-term concessional kind of loan from World Bank, from IMF, it will give you a long-term, maybe 30 years, at a lower interest, as opposed to borrow internally here at a higher interest and crowd out other Ugandans.
Can I tell you something, Simon? I'm just going to give you a tip that many banks do not share. When you move to the bank and you borrow a loan of 5 years, by the time you finish 2 years, the bank has already recouped its money that it lent you, and now the 3 years are the profits of the bank, which any banker will never tell you whenever he's giving you a loan. Meaning that the longer the loan, the more interest you pay, and that means that's why you find that we are lagging more in debt because we are taking long-term loans actually that take longer to repay back, and that is a lot of interest in the long run. In calculation, when you in a physical way of the way you're reading it on paper, you feel that it is a lower interest rate. But
all right.
In the long run, how much am I paying? I'm paying too heavy.
Mr. Jarvis Atwine, Director, PECT Collection Services, an economist, I want to thank you so much for the time you've given us, for your submission. Thank you, sir.
God bless you. Thank you.
All right, and that brings us to the end of tonight's edition of the Hot Seat. Good night, and God bless you guys.